I thought Christmas Eve would bring joy and surprise when I decided to drive the 3 hours to visit my daughter, Sarah, unannounced. The snow was falling gently as I pulled into the circular driveway of her husband Derek's family estate, my trunk filled with carefully wrapped presents. What I found instead will haunt me forever. There was Sarah, my 24-year-old baby girl, sitting on the frozen front steps in nothing but thin cotton pajamas, her lips blue with cold, her whole body shaking violently. Through the grand floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see Derek's wealthy family gathered around a roaring fireplace, raising crystal champagne flutes in celebration, their laughter echoing through the warm, golden-lit rooms. I rushed to Sarah, pulled her trembling body against mine, and burst through those heavy oak doors. The entire room fell silent as I held my daughter close and said just 3 words that would change everything. "Get out now!" I had whispered fiercely to Sarah as that room full of shocked faces stared at us. But my daughter just shook her head, tears streaming down her frozen cheeks. "Mom, I can't," she whispered back, her voice barely audible. "This is my home." That's when the real nightmare began to unfold. Derek stepped forward, his face flushed from expensive wine, straightening his cashmere sweater with an air of practiced superiority. Behind him, his mother, Patricia, rose from her velvet armchair like a queen addressing unwelcome peasants. "Megan, how lovely to see you," Patricia said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, though we weren't expecting guests this evening. I kept my arms wrapped around Sarah, feeling how thin she had become, how her bones jutted out where soft curves used to be. "Why was my daughter locked outside in freezing weather?" I demanded. Derek cleared his throat, shooting Sarah a warning look that made my blood run cold. "Sarah had a little accident earlier," he explained with practiced calm. "She broke Mother's antique Christmas ornament, the one from Germany that's been in our family for generations. We thought some time outside might help her reflect on being more careful with precious things." 3 hours. My daughter had been sitting on those concrete steps for 3 hours in 20-degree weather, while her husband's family celebrated Christmas in warmth and luxury. The ornament in question sat in perfect condition on the mantelpiece, clearly not broken at all. "That ornament looks fine to me," I said, pointing toward the fireplace. Patricia's laugh was like breaking glass. "Oh, that's a replacement we had rushed in from the antique shop. Cost us quite a bit, actually. Sarah will need to work extra shifts to pay us back for it." I learned that evening that Sarah had been living in the family's guest house for the past 2 years of marriage, not in the main residence as I'd believed. Derek's father, William, owned a chain of luxury car dealerships throughout the state, making the family worth millions, yet my daughter was working 2 jobs just to contribute to the household expenses. Sarah worked as a bookkeeper during the week and took catering shifts on weekends, often coming home exhausted, only to face criticism from Derek's sister, Amanda, about her discount store clothing and lack of proper education. The family had annual traditions of exchanging gifts that cost thousands of dollars, forcing Sarah to skip meals just to afford something modest for each of them. As the evening wore on, I watched Derek's behavior toward my daughter with growing horror. He spoke to her like she was a servant, not his wife. When she offered to help serve coffee, he snapped at her for not warming the cups first. When she suggested opening my Christmas gifts, Patricia declared it inappropriate since they weren't part of the family's scheduled gift exchange tomorrow. But what truly terrified me were the bruises. As Sarah moved around the kitchen later, her sleeves rode up, revealing finger-shaped marks on both her arms. When I asked about them quietly, she quickly pulled her sleeves down. "I bruise easily now," she mumbled. "I've been clumsy lately." The way she said it, the defeated tone in her voice, the way she flinched when Derek called her name from the other room, it all painted a picture that made me sick to my stomach. This wasn't the confident, spirited daughter I had raised. This was a broken woman living in fear. Derek had changed the locks on the main house 6 months ago, Sarah told me in whispers. She was only allowed inside for approved activities, like cooking, cleaning, or entertaining Derek's business associates. The guest house had no heat some nights when Derek forgot to pay the utility bill for that building, claiming he was teaching Sarah about financial responsibility. The final straw came when Derek grabbed Sarah's wrist roughly as she reached for my coat to help me leave. "Careful with Mother's things," he said, squeezing hard enough to leave new marks. "You've already cost us enough today." I saw my daughter's face crumple, saw her accept this treatment as normal, and something deep inside me snapped. But I forced myself to stay calm to play the concerned but helpless mother they expected me to be. I kissed Sarah goodbye, promised to call soon, and drove to a hotel in town. But I didn't sleep that night. I spent those dark hours planning because I had recognized something in Derek's eyes that terrified me more than his cruelty. I had seen calculation, the look of someone planning something much worse than emotional abuse. My daughter was in real danger, and her husband's family was not just enabling it. They were orchestrating it. I checked out of the hotel before dawn, driving back to Derek's estate as the winter sun painted the snow-covered grounds in deceptive beauty. I parked my car down the street and walked back through the neighboring woods, my breath forming clouds in the bitter cold air. Years of hiking had kept me in decent shape, and the thick pine trees provided perfect cover as I approached the house from behind. My plan was simple: get closer to understand what was really happening to Sarah. But what I discovered was far more sinister than I could have imagined. The family room windows were partially open despite the cold, and voices carried clearly across the frozen garden. Derek was on his phone pacing near the fireplace, while Patricia sat at her antique writing desk, papers spread before her. "Yes, Dr. Marcus, I understand the process," Derek was saying. "How soon can we schedule the evaluation?" My blood turned to ice as I crept closer to the window, hiding behind a snow-covered hedge. "The medication should have made her more compliant by now," Patricia was saying to someone else, apparently on a second phone. "I've been putting it in her food for weeks. Anti-anxiety pills crushed up in her morning coffee and her dinner every night. She should be showing clear signs of instability soon." Derek ended his call and turned to his mother with a satisfied smile. "Dr. Marcus can have her committed within a week of his evaluation. He owes our family favors after we helped cover up his malpractice suit last year. $50,000 and Sarah disappears into a psychiatric facility indefinitely." "And the inheritance?" Patricia asked, looking up from her paperwork. $800,000 from her grandmother's estate will transfer to me as her spouse once she's declared mentally incompetent. The lawyer says it's ironclad as long as we have medical documentation of her instability. I had to grip the frozen hedge to keep from falling over. Sarah had never mentioned any inheritance to me. She probably didn't even know about it yet. Patricia shuffled through the papers on her desk. "I've already forged 3 incident reports documenting her erratic behavior. The time she supposedly threw dishes at Amanda, the time she allegedly threatened to harm herself, the time she wandered outside in her nightgown claiming she was lost. None of those things had ever happened. I knew my daughter better than anyone, and Sarah had never shown signs of mental illness or violent behavior in her entire life." "What if the commitment doesn't work?" Derek asked, pouring himself a glass of whiskey despite the early hour. Patricia's smile was purely evil. "Then we moved to Plan B. A tragic accidental overdose. Poor Sarah, so distraught over her mental health struggles, took too many sleeping pills. We'll be devastated, of course. Grief-stricken. But at least her suffering will be over." Derek laughed, actually laughed as he described how easy Sarah had been to manipulate and isolate. "She believes everything I tell her. When I say she's forgetful, she accepts it. When I say she's clumsy, she apologizes. When I say she's worthless, she tries harder to please me. It's almost too easy." "You learned from the best," Patricia said with pride. "Remember how well this worked with Jennifer." My heart stopped. Jennifer had been Derek's first wife, who had died 3 years ago in what was ruled an accidental fall down the stairs. "Jennifer was more trouble," Derek admitted. "She started asking questions about our finances, threatening to leave me right before her insurance payout. At least this time we have a bigger prize and a more compliant target." Amanda's voice suddenly joined the conversation as she entered the room. "Is Sarah showing more symptoms?" I told Dr. Marcus she had another episode yesterday talking to herself in the garden. Perfect, Patricia said, making notes. The more documentation we have, the easier the commitment process becomes. Though honestly, I'm leaning toward the overdose option. Cleaner, faster, and no risk of her ever talking to anyone. They spent the next hour planning my daughter's murder with the casual efficiency of people discussing dinner plans. Derek owed $300,000 to loan sharks money he had stolen from his father's dealership accounts to feed a gambling addiction. Patricia had been embezzling from the nursing home she managed using resident Social Security checks for her own expenses. Sarah's inheritance would solve all their financial problems while eliminating the only witness to Derek's abuse and theft. As I listened, hidden in those frozen bushes with snow soaking through my clothes, I realized this family had turned murder into a business model. They carefully selected vulnerable women, isolated them, gaslighted them into believing they were mentally ill, then either had them committed to steal their assets or killed them outright. I thought about Jennifer, Derek's first wife, who probably died knowing exactly what her husband was doing to her, but being powerless to stop it. I thought about other women who might have crossed paths with this family and simply disappeared, their deaths written off as accidents or suicides. But I also thought about something else Derek and Patricia couldn't possibly know. I had spent 30 years as a paralegal in the district attorney's office before retiring. I knew how to build a case, how to gather evidence, and how to make it stick in court. More importantly, I knew people who could help me. Derek and Patricia were about to discover that they had chosen the wrong woman's daughter to murder. I was going to destroy them so completely that they would spend the rest of their lives regretting the day they ever heard the name Sarah. But first, I had to keep my daughter alive long enough to save her. I waited until Derek's car pulled out of the driveway the next morning before approaching the guest house where Sarah lived. The small building looked charming from the outside, but up close I could see the problems. Several windows were cracked, letting in cold air. The front steps were rotting and dangerous. This wasn't a cozy cottage. It was barely livable housing that Derek used to control and humiliate my daughter. Sarah answered my knock wearing a heavy sweater despite being indoors, and I immediately understood why. The house was freezing cold. "Mom, what are you doing here so early?" she asked, but her face lit up with genuine joy for the first time since I'd arrived. "I brought you some Christmas presents," I said, holding up a bag of carefully chosen items. "Can we talk privately?" Once inside, I was horrified by the living conditions. The furniture was old and broken. The kitchen barely functioned. Sarah was living like a prisoner in a poverty-stricken cell while her husband's family lived in luxury just yards away. "Sarah, honey, we need to have a serious conversation," I said, sitting beside her on the worn couch. "I need you to tell me the truth about what's happening here." At first, she tried to maintain the facade. Derek was just stressed about work. His family had high standards. She was trying to fit in better. All the standard excuses I'd heard from abuse victims during my years working in the legal system. But when I gently pushed up her sleeves and saw the full extent of the bruises, Sarah finally broke down. The story that came pouring out was even worse than what I'd overheard. Derek had been hitting her for over a year, always in places where bruises wouldn't show. He controlled every aspect of her life, monitoring her phone calls, limiting her access to money, isolating her from friends and family. He had convinced her that she was losing her memory, that she was becoming unstable, that nobody would believe her if she tried to tell anyone about his behavior. "He says I'm just like his first wife," Sarah whispered through her tears. "He says Jennifer went crazy too, and that's why she had to be put away before she died." "Sarah, what exactly did Derek tell you about Jennifer's death?" "That she fell down the stairs during a mental breakdown. But Mom, I found something hidden in the guest house attic." Sarah led me up a narrow staircase to a small storage area under the roof. Behind boxes of old Christmas decorations, she pulled out a shoebox containing a diary and several photographs. "This was Jennifer's," Sarah said. "I think she hid it here before she died." The diary entries painted a horrifying picture that matched exactly what Derek was doing to Sarah. Jennifer had documented the same pattern of abuse, isolation and gaslighting. She had written about Derek's gambling debts, about suspicious financial transactions, about Patricia's cruel manipulations. But the final entries were what made my hands shake as I read them. "Derek knows I found the bank records," one entry said. "He knows I discovered he's been stealing from his father's business. I tried to confront him tonight, but he just smiled and said I was imagining things. He's going to kill me. I know he's going to kill me. If something happens to me, it's not an accident." The last entry was dated just 2 days before Jennifer's death. "I'm hiding this diary where Derek will never think to look. If someone finds it, please know that I loved my life and never would have harmed myself. Derek has been putting something in my food that makes me dizzy and confused. He wants people to think I'm mentally ill. He needs my insurance money to pay his gambling debts. If I die, make sure the police know it was murder." I sat in that cold attic holding a dead woman's diary, understanding that my daughter was living the exact same nightmare that had killed Jennifer. But I also held something else evidence. "Sarah, I need to ask you something very important," I said carefully. "Have you been feeling unusually tired lately? Dizzy? Having trouble concentrating?" "Yes," she said, surprised. "Derek says it's because I'm not eating properly, but I feel strange all the time now, like I'm thinking through fog." I thought about Patricia's phone conversation about crushing medication into Sarah's food. "Honey, I think they've been drugging you. Have you been eating meals they prepare?" The color drained from Sarah's face as the pieces clicked into place. "Derek insists on making my coffee every morning, says he wants to take care of me, and Patricia always brings me dinner from the main house." That afternoon, while Derek was at work, I called an old colleague from the district attorney's office. Detective Rodriguez had worked dozens of domestic violence cases with me over the years, and I knew he would listen. "Megan, good to hear from you," he said, "though something in your voice tells me this isn't a social call." I explained everything from the overheard conversation to Jennifer's diary to Sarah's suspicious symptoms. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. "You know, I always had questions about that Jennifer case," he finally said. "The scene never quite made sense to me. Healthy young woman with no history of mental illness suddenly falls downstairs during a psychotic break. But the family was wealthy, had good lawyers, and there wasn't enough evidence to push harder." "Well, now we might have that evidence," I said, "but we need to move carefully. They're planning to have Sarah committed within the week, and if that fails, they're going to kill her." Rodriguez put me in touch with a private investigator named Janet who specialized in financial crimes. Within 24 hours, Janet had uncovered a paper trail that proved Derek had been embezzling from his father's dealerships for over 2 years, stealing nearly $500,000 to cover gambling losses. More importantly, Janet discovered something that Derek and Patricia didn't know. Sarah's grandmother had left specific instructions with the family lawyer that Sarah should be notified of her inheritance immediately upon the old woman's death 6 months ago. Derek had bribed a clerk in the lawyer's office to delay notification, but the clerk had kept records of the bribe as insurance. "They're working against a deadline," Janet explained during our clandestine meeting at a diner outside town. "The lawyer has to notify Sarah of the inheritance by New Year's Day, or risk losing his law license. Derek knows this, which is why they're rushing the commitment process." I also learned something that made my blood run cold. Derek's loan sharks weren't just any criminals. They were connected to a violent organization that had been linked to several suspicious deaths across 3 states. Derek wasn't just in financial trouble. He was in life-threatening danger that he was trying to solve by murdering my daughter. But the most shocking discovery came when Janet showed me police reports from 2 other states where Derek had lived previously. In Colorado, a woman named Rachel had died in a suspicious car accident 6 months after marrying a man matching Derek's description. In Arizona, a woman named Beth had committed suicide by overdose just weeks after her wealthy aunt left her a substantial inheritance. Derek wasn't just a domestic abuser. He was a serial killer who had been murdering women for their money for at least 5 years. "We need to move fast," Rodriguez told me during an emergency meeting. "But we also need to be smart. This guy is dangerous and his family has resources. We get one shot to take them down, and it has to be airtight. That's when I proposed a plan so risky that it made everyone in the room nervous. But it was also the only way to save Sarah's life and ensure these monsters faced justice for all their crimes. We were going to let them think their plan was working right up until the moment we destroyed them completely. The next morning, I knocked on the front door of Derek's family estate with my heart pounding, but my face arranged in the expression of a concerned, slightly helpless mother. William answered Derek's father, and I could immediately see where his son had learned to hide his true nature behind a charming facade. "Megan, what a pleasant surprise," William said, though his eyes were calculating. "Derek and Patricia aren't home right now." "Actually, I was hoping to speak with you," I said. "About Sarah. I'm worried about her." William invited me into his office, a mahogany-paneled room lined with photographs of himself with local politicians and business leaders. I had researched him thoroughly before this meeting, learning that his reputation in the community was spotless. He served on charity boards, donated generously to local causes, and was respected as a pillar of the business community, which made what I was about to do even more crucial. "William, I need to show you something," I said, pulling out a folder that Janet, the private investigator, had prepared. "I think Derek has been stealing from your dealerships." I watched his face change as I laid out the financial records, the forged documents, the pattern of missing money that perfectly matched Derek's gambling debts. William wasn't just shocked, he was devastated. "My God," he whispered, studying the bank statements. "I trusted him completely. He's been my heir, a parent my successor. How could I have been so blind?" "There's more," I said gently, and proceeded to show him the evidence about Patricia's drug scheme, the photographs of Sarah's bruises, and Jennifer's diary. William aged 10 years in the space of our conversation. This was a man who had built his reputation on honesty and integrity, discovering that his wife and son were monsters who had been committing crimes under his roof. "Jennifer always seemed afraid of something," he said quietly. "I thought she was just shy, adjusting to the family. Patricia said she was fragile, that we needed to be patient with her. My God, they were torturing that poor girl." I pulled out my final piece of evidence, copies of the police reports from Colorado and Arizona, showing Derek's pattern of murdering women across multiple states. "Your son is a serial killer," I said simply, "and if we don't stop him, Sarah will be his next victim." William stared at the documents for a long time, his hands shaking. Then he looked up at me with eyes full of pain, but also determination. "What do you need me to do?" Over the next 3 days, William proved to be an invaluable ally. He had access to Derek's financial accounts, his personal files, even his phone records. More importantly, he had the respect and connections in the community that gave our investigation credibility. Meanwhile, Detective Rodriguez had quietly reopened Jennifer's case, and Janet was building a comprehensive financial crimes portfolio that would ensure Derek faced federal charges. We installed hidden cameras throughout the estate, with William's permission, positioning them to capture Derek's abuse and Patricia's drug scheme. But on Thursday evening, everything nearly fell apart. Sarah collapsed during dinner at the main house, convulsing and vomiting, while Derek and Patricia watched with barely concealed satisfaction. William, now fully aware of their plan, called 911, while I raced to the hospital. The emergency room doctors were baffled by Sarah's symptoms until I privately told the attending physician to test for anti-anxiety medication poisoning. The results were terrifying. Sarah had enough drugs in her system to kill her. "Another hour and we would have lost her," Dr. Martinez told me. "Someone has been systematically poisoning this woman for weeks." Derek and Patricia arrived at the hospital within minutes, their performance of concerned family members almost convincing. But I caught them in the hallway coaching each other on what to tell the doctors. "Remember, she's been acting erratic lately," Patricia was whispering, talking to herself, forgetting conversations, having mood swings. "This is obviously a suicide attempt." "The poor thing has been struggling with depression," Derek added, practicing his grief-stricken husband routine. "I've been trying to get her help, but she's been resistant to treatment." They walked into Sarah's hospital room with tears in their eyes, holding hands and comforting each other. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed they were devastated family members dealing with a mental health crisis. But Detective Rodriguez was recording everything from a hidden position in the hallway, and the hidden camera William had installed in Sarah's hospital room was capturing their every word. "Oh, sweetheart," Patricia said, taking Sarah's hand. "We're so sorry we didn't see how much you were struggling." "The important thing is getting you the help you need," Derek added, stroking Sarah's hair. "Dr. Marcus is already on his way to evaluate your condition. We're going to make sure you get proper treatment this time." Sarah, still weak from the poisoning, looked confused and frightened. "I don't understand what happened," she whispered. "I felt fine and then everything went dark." "That's what happens during episodes," Derek said with false gentleness. "You don't remember them. That's why we need professional help to keep you safe." I wanted to scream to tear them away from my daughter and expose their lies right there in the hospital room. But I forced myself to maintain my role as the concerned mother who didn't understand what was happening. The hardest part was leaving Sarah alone with them that night. But Detective Rodriguez assured me that hospital security would protect her, and we needed Derek and Patricia to feel confident their plan was working. "Tomorrow, Dr. Marcus will declare her mentally incompetent," Rodriguez explained. "They'll have her committed, and within a week they'll have control of her inheritance, but we'll be ready for them." I spent that night in my hotel room staring at the ceiling and praying that we weren't making a terrible mistake. My daughter was lying in a hospital bed weak from poisoning, while her would-be killers planned her destruction. But by morning, our trap was set. Derek and Patricia had no idea that their perfect plan was about to become their complete downfall. The next phase would determine whether my daughter lived or died, and whether justice would finally be served for Jennifer and all the other women Derek had murdered. The call came at 6 a.m. Detective Rodriguez's voice was grim but controlled. "Megan, we need you to come to the hospital immediately, but you need to be prepared for what you're about to see." I drove through the empty morning streets with my heart in my throat, terrified of what I might find. But when I arrived at the hospital, Rodriguez pulled me aside before I could go to Sarah's room. "She's alive," he said quickly, seeing the panic in my eyes. But Sarah suffered another poisoning episode during the night, much worse this time. The doctors say if she had gotten the medication even an hour later, she would have died. "They tried to kill her in the hospital." Derek brought her coffee from the cafeteria. Security cameras show him adding something to it before entering her room. We have him on video committing attempted murder. My legs nearly gave out. They had been so confident, so arrogant that they tried to poison my daughter while she was under medical care. But here's what they don't know, Rodriguez continued. Dr. Martinez was ready for this. We switched Sarah's coffee with a harmless substitute before she drank it. The symptoms she displayed were acting coached by our undercover officer, who's been posing as a night nurse. I stared at him in amazement. Sarah was acting. Your daughter is stronger than they gave her credit for. When we explained what was happening, she insisted on helping us catch them. She wanted justice for Jennifer and all the other women Derek hurt. Rodriguez led me to a secure room where I could watch the investigation unfold through hidden cameras. Sarah was lying in her hospital bed, looking convincingly weak and confused, while Derek and Patricia consulted with Dr. Marcus about her deteriorating mental condition. Dr. Marcus was a thin, nervous man who kept glancing around the room as if expecting to be caught. His medical license was already suspended in 2 other states for insurance fraud, and Derek's family had been protecting him in exchange for his cooperation in their schemes. The patient is clearly experiencing a complete psychotic break, Dr. Marcus was telling Derek. I recommend immediate commitment to a long-term psychiatric facility. Given the severity of her condition and her history of suicide attempts, I don't believe she'll ever be competent to manage her own affairs. How quickly can we have her transferred? Patricia asked, her voice full of fake concern. I can have the paperwork filed within the hour. With your family's reputation and my professional evaluation, no judge will question the decision. Derek squeezed Sarah's hand with false tenderness. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We're going to take care of everything. You'll never have to worry about money or decisions again." What they didn't know was that Sarah was wearing a wire that every word was being recorded and that FBI agents were already in position throughout the hospital. But the trap wasn't complete yet. We needed them to incriminate themselves fully to confess to their plans while they thought they were safe. That's when William entered the room playing his part perfectly. "Son, I need to speak with you privately," he said, his voice heavy with apparent grief, "about Sarah's inheritance." Derek's eyes lit up with greed even as he maintained his sorrowful expression. "Of course, Father, though I hate to think about money at a time like this." "I know this is difficult," William said, "but the lawyer called. Sarah needs to be declared incompetent before the end of the day, or the inheritance will be frozen in probate for years." Patricia leaned forward eagerly. "How much are we talking about exactly?" $800,000 plus the property in Vermont that could be worth another $200,000. I watched Derek's face transform for just a moment, his mask slipping to reveal pure avarice before he caught himself. "Well, if that's what's best for Sarah," he said piously, "I just want her to get the help she needs." "Of course," William agreed. "Though I have to ask, have there been other incidents like this? The insurance company is asking questions about Jennifer's death, wondering if there might be a pattern of mental illness in women who marry into our family." Derek and Patricia exchanged a quick glance, and I knew we were about to get the confession we needed. "Jennifer was different," Patricia said carefully. "She was much more unstable than Sarah. We tried to help her, but she was beyond saving." "The poor thing was delusional," Derek added. "She thought we were trying to hurt her when we were actually trying to protect her from herself." "She even claimed we were poisoning her food," Patricia laughed, "as if we would ever hurt someone we loved." "It was tragic when she fell down those stairs," Derek said, his voice full of practiced sadness. "But honestly, it might have been for the best. She was suffering so much." William nodded sympathetically. "And now, with Sarah showing similar symptoms, well, hopefully we can get her help before she reaches Jennifer's level," Derek said. "Though between you and me, Father, I'm not sure how much hope there is for recovery." Patricia leaned closer to William, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "The doctors say that if Sarah doesn't respond to treatment, her condition could deteriorate rapidly. It might be kinder to everyone if nature takes its course." "You mean if she died?" William asked, his voice carefully neutral. "These things happen," Derek said with a slight shrug. "Mentally ill patients often harm themselves despite the best care. And honestly, Sarah seems so miserable. Death might be a mercy." I felt sick listening to them discuss my daughter's murder with such casual cruelty. But I also felt a fierce satisfaction knowing that their words were being recorded by multiple devices and witnessed by federal agents. Dr. Marcus cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should focus on the immediate commitment proceedings. I have other patients to attend to." "Of course," Derek said suddenly, all business. "How soon can you have her declared incompetent?" "The paperwork will be filed within the hour," Dr. Marcus repeated. "By this afternoon, you'll have full control over her medical decisions and her financial assets." "And if someone questions the diagnosis," Patricia asked. Dr. Marcus smiled coldly. "No one questions my professional judgment. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never had a ruling overturned." "Good." Derek said, his mask completely gone now. "Because I need access to that inheritance money immediately. I have debts that need to be paid, and Sarah won't be needing it where she's going." That's when Detective Rodriguez's voice came through the hospital's PA system. "This is the police. The building is surrounded. Everyone in room 312, place your hands where we can see them." The look of shock and terror on Derek and Patricia's faces was worth every moment of fear and planning I had endured. Dr. Marcus dropped his clipboard and tried to run for the door, only to be tackled by FBI agents who'd been waiting in the hallway. Derek spun toward Sarah's bed, his face contorted with rage. "You little bitch!" he snarled. "You've been awake this whole time." "Yes, I have," Sarah said, sitting up and pulling the monitoring wires off her body. and I heard every word you said about murdering me." The transformation in my daughter was remarkable. Gone was the frightened, broken woman I had found shivering on the front steps. In her place was a strong, determined survivor who had risked her life to bring her abusers to justice. "You can't prove anything," Patricia screamed as federal agents handcuffed her. "We're pillars of this community. No one will believe we did anything wrong." Detective Rodriguez stepped into the room holding a tablet that showed the recorded conversation. "Actually, we can prove everything. Your son just confessed to murdering his first wife and planning to kill his second wife for her inheritance money. We have it all on video." Derek's face went white as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. "That's not what I meant," he stammered. "You're taking my words out of context. We also have evidence of your embezzlement from your father's business, your gambling debts, and your connections to organized crime," Rodriguez continued. "Oh, and the FBI would like to speak with you about suspicious deaths in Colorado and Arizona." As they led Derek and Patricia away in handcuffs, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The nightmare was over. Sarah was safe. Justice would be served. But the true satisfaction came from watching Derek's expression as he was loaded into the police car. For the first time since I had met him, he looked genuinely afraid. The man who had terrorized my daughter and murdered innocent women was finally facing consequences for his actions. And we were just getting started. The courtroom was packed 3 months later as Derek's trial began. What had started as a local domestic violence case had exploded into a national story when the FBI connected Derek to a string of murders across multiple states. The media dubbed him the inheritance killer, and his case became a cautionary tale about predators who target vulnerable women for their money. I sat in the front row every day watching as prosecutor after prosecutor laid out the evidence we had gathered. Sarah testified with incredible strength and composure, describing Derek's abuse and the family's murder plot in detail that left the jury horrified. But the most damning testimony came from Detective Rodriguez, who had worked with the FBI to uncover the full scope of Derek's crimes. The defendant's pattern was remarkably consistent. Rodriguez told the hushed courtroom. He would target recently widowed or divorced women with significant assets. He would court them intensively, isolate them from friends and family, then begin a campaign of psychological and physical abuse designed to make them appear mentally unstable. The prosecutor displayed photos of Derek's victims on a large screen. Rachel from Colorado, Beth from Arizona, Jennifer from our state, and nearly a dozen other women whose deaths had been ruled accidents or suicides. In each case, the victim died just weeks or months before gaining access to substantial inheritance or insurance money. Rodriguez continued, money that Derek would have inherited as their spouse. Dr. Martinez took the stand to describe Sarah's poisoning, explaining how the systematic drugging would have made her appear mentally ill while slowly killing her. Another few days of this level of medication, and Miss Sarah would have suffered permanent organ damage, Dr. Martinez testified. Derek was essentially torturing her to death while maintaining plausible deniability about her declining health. Patricia's trial was equally devastating. The evidence showed that she had been the mastermind behind the family's criminal enterprise, using her position managing a nursing home to practice her drug schemes on elderly residents before perfecting the techniques on Derek's wives. Mrs. Patricia had been stealing from nursing home residents for over a decade, the financial crimes prosecutor explained. She would drug patients to make them appear confused, then convince their families that the patients were no longer capable of managing their own finances. She would then gain power of attorney and systematically steal their life savings. The nursing home investigation revealed dozens of victims' elderly people who had died alone and confused, while Patricia stole everything they had worked their lives to accumulate. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came when the FBI uncovered Derek's connection to organized crime. His gambling debts weren't just to local bookmakers. He owed money to a criminal organization that operated across the entire southeastern United States. Derek was essentially working as a contract killer, FBI agent Thompson testified. The organization would identify wealthy women who could be easily isolated, and Derek would marry them and arrange their deaths. He kept a percentage of the stolen money, and the organization laundered the rest through their various enterprises. The evidence showed that Derek had been responsible for at least 23 murders over a 7-year period. He wasn't just a domestic abuser who had escalated to murder. He was a professional killer who used marriage as his weapon. William took the stand to describe his horror at discovering his son's crimes and his determination to make amends. He had turned over all of Derek's financial records to the FBI and had liquidated his own assets to compensate the victims' families. I failed to protect the women my son brought into our family, William said, his voice breaking. I was so blinded by my desire to believe the best about Derek that I ignored obvious warning signs. Jennifer tried to tell me she was afraid, and I dismissed her concerns as nervousness about fitting into our family. I will regret that failure for the rest of my life. Amanda, Derek's sister, had been arrested as an accessory to murder for her role in providing false testimony about Sarah's mental state. She cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence, revealing details about the family's crimes that even I hadn't suspected. Derek and Mother had been planning this for years, Amanda testified. They studied other cases where wealthy women had died under suspicious circumstances, and they developed a system that they thought was foolproof. They believed their money and social status would protect them from serious investigation. Dr. Marcus, the corrupt psychiatrist, faced federal charges in multiple states for his role in the scheme. His cooperation led to the discovery of a network of corrupt medical professionals who helped wealthy criminals have inconvenient family members declared mentally incompetent. The trial lasted 6 weeks, and the evidence was so overwhelming that Derek's defense team could only argue for mercy, not innocence. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: first-degree murder conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, domestic violence, and racketeering. Derek was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 99 years for his other crimes. The judge made it clear that Derek would never see freedom again. Patricia received a sentence of 40 years in federal prison, which at her age amounted to a life sentence. Amanda was sentenced to 15 years, and Dr. Marcus received 25 years, plus the permanent loss of his medical license. But the legal consequences were only part of their punishment. The media coverage had destroyed their social standing completely. William was forced to sell his dealership chain to pay restitution to victims' families, and the family name became synonymous with evil in our community. More importantly, the investigation had led to arrests across multiple states, as law enforcement agencies identified other members of the criminal organization Derek had worked for. Sarah's courage in helping us expose the truth had saved countless other women from becoming victims. As I watched Derek being led away to begin his life sentence, I felt a deep satisfaction that justice had finally been served. He would spend the rest of his life in a small cell with no money, no power, and no ability to hurt anyone else. Jennifer and all the other women he had murdered could finally rest in peace, knowing their killer would never be free again. But the most beautiful part of the whole experience was watching my daughter reclaim her strength and rebuild her life. 6 months after Derek's conviction, I stood in the lobby of the Jennifer Memorial Foundation, watching my daughter Sarah address a room full of domestic violence survivors and their families. The woman, speaking with confidence and compassion, bore no resemblance to the broken, frightened person I had found shivering on those front steps. Sarah had used her $800,000 inheritance, plus the additional funds recovered from Derek's criminal activities, to establish a foundation dedicated to helping other women escape dangerous marriages. The foundation provided legal aid, safe housing, counseling services, and most importantly, education about the warning signs of predatory relationships. I want every woman in this room to understand that what happened to me could happen to anyone, Sarah was saying to the packed auditorium. These predators are skilled manipulators who specifically target kind, trusting people. There is no shame in falling victim to their deception. The shame belongs entirely to them. William had shocked everyone by donating his entire fortune to the foundation after selling his dealership chain. The guilt over his failure to protect Jennifer and Sarah had transformed him into one of our most dedicated advocates. "I spent my whole life building a business and a reputation," he told me during one of our planning meetings. "But none of that matters if I can't use what's left of my resources to prevent other families from suffering what mine caused." William had also become a powerful voice in the business community, speaking to corporate leaders about recognizing signs of domestic violence in their employees and providing support resources. His transformation from enabling family member to passionate advocate had been remarkable to witness. Detective Rodriguez had been promoted to head of the domestic violence unit for our entire region, and the investigative techniques we had developed together were being taught to law enforcement agencies across the country. The case had become a model for how to build complex criminal cases against wealthy, connected abusers. The most important lesson we learned, Rodriguez explained to a conference of police chiefs, is that domestic violence crosses all economic and social boundaries. Rich, powerful families can be just as dangerous as any other abusers, and they often have more resources to cover up their crimes. Janet, our private investigator, had started a new business specializing in protecting potential inheritance victims. She worked with lawyers and family members to identify situations where vulnerable people might be targeted for their assets, and she had already prevented several attempted murders. Sarah's case taught me that financial predators often use marriage as their primary weapon, Janet explained during a television interview. "They're not crimes of passion. They're carefully planned business operations designed to steal everything their victims have worked for." Dr. Martinez had developed new protocols for recognizing systematic poisoning in hospital patients, and his research had led to the identification of dozens of cases where patients had been murdered by family members using the same techniques Patricia had employed. But perhaps the most meaningful change had come in my own life. I had discovered a sense of purpose I hadn't known I was missing during my retirement. Working with domestic violence survivors, helping them navigate the legal system, and educating other mothers about protecting their daughters had given my life new meaning. "You saved my life, Mom," Sarah told me during our weekly coffee date at our favorite cafe. "Not just from Derek, but you showed me that I had value worth fighting for. You never gave up on me even when I had given up on myself." Sarah had also found love again, though this time with a man who understood and respected her strength. Thomas worked as a counselor at the foundation helping male survivors of domestic violence, and he treated Sarah with the kindness and equality she deserved. "The difference is night and day," Sarah explained to a support group. "With Derek, I was always walking on eggshells trying to avoid setting him off. With Thomas, I can be completely myself. He celebrates my successes instead of feeling threatened by them. He supports my work instead of trying to control it." The foundation had grown beyond anything we had originally imagined. In our first year, we had helped over 300 women escape dangerous situations, provided legal representation in 57 cases, and successfully prosecuted 12 additional predatory marriages that followed patterns similar to Derek's. We had also established a research program studying the methods these predators used with the goal of developing early warning systems that could protect potential victims before they became trapped in abusive relationships. The key insight, Sarah explained to a group of social workers, is understanding that these aren't typical domestic violence situations that escalate over time. These are calculated criminal enterprises from the very beginning. The abuse, the isolation, the gaslighting, it's all designed to facilitate theft and murder. One of our most successful programs involved training bank employees, lawyers, and insurance agents to recognize the warning signs when clients suddenly changed their wills or financial arrangements after rapid marriages to controlling partners. We've identified at least 40 cases where potential victims were being set up for financial exploitation or murder, our program director explained. Early intervention saved their lives and prevented millions of dollars in theft. The ripple effects of our work had spread far beyond our local community. Legislators had passed new laws making it easier to prosecute inheritance-related murders, and medical schools were now required to teach courses on recognizing systematic poisoning. Most importantly, the foundation had given voice to Jennifer and all the other women Derek had murdered. Their stories were being told, their lives were being remembered, and their deaths had meaning in the lives they were now saving. As I looked around the Foundation's headquarters, bustling with staff members helping survivors rebuild their lives, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that transcended any personal victory. We had taken something horrific and transformed it into a force for good in the world. Sarah approached me after her speech, her face glowing with the confidence and purpose that had replaced the fear and doubt Derek had instilled in her. "Ready to go home, Mom?" she asked, linking her arm through mine. "More than ready," I said, smiling at my strong, beautiful daughter who had survived hell and emerged as a warrior fighting for others. We walked out into the bright afternoon sunshine, our hearts full of hope for the future and gratitude for the second chance we had been given. The nightmare was over. Justice had been served, and we had built something beautiful from the ashes of our pain. Derek would spend the rest of his life in prison, but we would spend the rest of ours making sure no other mother would have to find her daughter shivering on someone's doorstep, abandoned and afraid. The work was far from over, but we had proven that even the most powerful predators could be brought down when good people refused to give up and fought back with intelligence, courage, and determination. As we drove home through our peaceful town, I thought about all the women who were safer tonight, because Sarah had found the strength to help us expose the truth. That was Derek's real punishment, knowing that his crimes had inspired a movement that was saving the very people he had tried to destroy, too. And that was our victory, turning our pain into purpose, our fear into strength, and our family's trauma into hope for families everywhere. The 3 words I had spoken when I burst through Derek's door that Christmas Eve had been, "Get out now." But the real message, the one that echoed through everything we had accomplished since then, was much more powerful: no more victims. That was our promise to Jennifer, to Sarah, and to every woman who deserved to live her life free from fear and violence. And it was a promise we would keep fighting to fulfill for as long as we had breath in our bodies. Have you ever had to trust your instincts to protect someone you love even when everyone else thought you were overreacting? The bond between mother and daughter is one of the strongest forces in the world, and sometimes that maternal instinct is the only thing standing between our children and terrible danger. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about the importance of trusting our gut feelings when something doesn't feel right. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of the power we have to protect and support each other, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the strength we find in our darkest moments and the justice that's possible when we refuse to give up. Thank you for listening to my story and for caring about the safety and well-being of women everywhere. Together we can make sure no daughter ever has to shiver alone in the cold while predators celebrate inside. Together we can build a world where love protects instead of destroys, where families lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and never forget that you have more power than you know to make a difference in this world.